The event today will be attended by all of the royal family members.
The deep hushed space of the royal archives at Windsor Castle always carried a distinctive scent of time, a blend of aged leather-thick paper and the dust of centuries past. On a late afternoon, Prince Edward, a man who always maintained a somber demeanor and absolute reverence for his family's history, was carefully sorting through old document files. As the youngest son of the late Queen, Edward had long chosen a quieter role away from the spotlight of the throne, taking on the responsibility of preserving intangible legacies and internal records that the public rarely accessed. This routine review of the archives was an annual task to categorize personal documents from the previous reign, a job that demanded both patience and solitude. His footsteps halted before a small cedarwood chest tucked away behind shelves filled with diplomatic records from the previous century. The chest bore no label, its surface adorned with intricate carvings that had faded over the years. When he inserted the master key into the brass lock, a crisp click echoed through the silent space, opening an entirely new chapter of contemporary history. Inside, resting solemnly on worn red velvet, lay a slender leather box and a thick paper envelope sealed with dark red royal wax bearing the late Queen's personal emblem, a symbol Edward recognized instantly, stirring a surge of emotion within him. Carefully opening the leather box, Edward was stunned by the sparkling radiance emanating from within. It was an exquisitely crafted diamond crown, its gemstones cut to perfection in a classic style, catching the last light of the day and radiating brilliant yet remarkably elegant beams. This was no ordinary piece from the public collection, but a treasure of profound symbolic meaning, once tied to the late Queen's most private moments. In the early years of her reign, the crown seemed to encapsulate an entire era of glory and the pride of the monarchy. But what made his heart beat faster was the accompanying envelope. With trembling fingers, Edward broke the wax seal and pulled out the paper. Inside, the elegant, slender, yet resolute handwriting and black ink of his late mother appeared clearly before his eyes. Each line felt like a solemn narrative reaching out from the past. In the letter, the late Queen declared with finality that this crown was not merely royal property, but held the highest spiritual significance, to be bestowed only upon the woman truly worthy of representing the soul of the crown, the one who possessed unwavering dedication, steadfastness, and noble character to guide the royal family through the upheavals of a new era. The next line struck Edward like a hammer blow, shattering the established order in his mind. The person personally designated by the late Queen to inherit this treasure was not Queen Camilla, the current wife of King Charles, who had endured decades of ups and downs and weathered intense public scrutiny since the early 1990s to attain her present position at the head of the royal household. Instead, the name clearly and formally recorded in the will was Princess Catherine, the Princess of Wales, the eldest daughter-in-law who had entered the royal family through the wedding of the century in 2011. Long beloved by the public for her impeccable grace and quiet dedication, was now recognized by the legendary monarch herself as the sole spiritual heir. Edward stood motionless in the archive room, the paper in his hand suddenly feeling unbearably heavy. The emergence of this letter was like an underground earthquake, possessing devastating power against the fragile peace within the palace. He understood all too well the power structure and the delicate matters of honor within the House of Windsor. Making this will public would directly undermine Queen Camilla's symbolic status, creating a cruel comparison and deepening the already complex internal fractures that had existed since the late Queen's passing. The daylight outside the windows had completely faded, leaving the archive room enveloped in darkness. Edward carefully folded the letter and returned it along with the crown to its original place, but his mind could not return to its previous calm. He realized he was no longer merely a custodian of documents, but had unwittingly become the keeper of a national secret, a key that could unlock a new crisis standing between his reverence for his late mother's will and his duty to protect the stability of the monarchy. A fierce internal conflict began to rage within the somber prince. A heavy silence enveloped the closed meeting room at Buckingham Palace, carrying a tension far different from the somber quiet of the Windsor archives. Under the stern golden glow of the crystal chandeliers, Prince Edward sat facing the most trusted royal advisors, men who had devoted their lives to maintaining balance and concealing the cracks behind the palace's solid walls. The forgotten letter now lay neatly in the center of the large mahogany table, deceptively smooth yet containing enough power to upend the entire order of the royal household. The advisors, their faces etched with years of experience, and sharp eyes past the accompanying documents among themselves, frowns deepened, and lips pressed tightly together in place of words. Professional instinct and loyalty to the institution immediately drove them to seek the safest solution to bury the truth. To them, the late queen's will, no matter how sacred, posed a direct threat to the current stability. With concerned glances and subtle shakes of the head, they argued that revealing a document that effectively denied the authority of the sitting queen at this moment would be media suicide. Keeping the letter hidden and returning it to the shadows of history was seen as the only choice to protect the monarchy's fragile peace. However, Edward's resolve became an immovable stone wall blocking that intention. His fingers tapped a steady, decisive rhythm on the table, his gaze refusing to yield to any pressure from those around him. For him, this was not merely an administrative matter or a negotiable document. It was his mother's final wish, her highest expression of trust from the monarch who had dedicated her entire life to duty. Betraying that will for temporary calm would be an insult to history itself. Edward's silence and unyielding stance served as a silent declaration that he was prepared to confront the entire advisory system to protect the truth. The conflict reached its peak when the information somehow reached Queen Camilla's ears behind the doors of her private chambers. She received the news not with explosive anger, but with a deep, soul-wrenching pain. Standing before a large mirror, gazing at her reflection, and the lines time had etched upon her face, Camilla felt a suffocating sense of injustice. For decades, she had walked a long and thorny path, enduring public coldness, quietly making sacrifices, and gradually rebuilding her image to deserve her place beside King Charles. The rejected crown was not just a piece of jewelry, but the ultimate acknowledgement she had long desired, yet one forever denied by her predecessor. Her hands clenched the silk handkerchief tightly, her chest rising and falling with heavy breaths, as she realized her position in the late queen's heart had never truly been secure. The tension began to spread throughout the palace, like an underground current seeping through every corridor and hidden corner of Clarence House. Courtiers started moving more cautiously, exchanging quick, probing glances. The rift was no longer a mere hypothesis. At the advisors' table, it had become a ticking time bomb, filling the royal atmosphere with a stifling heaviness and preparing the ground for an unavoidable confrontation. The oppressive atmosphere of Buckingham Palace swiftly traveled along the inexorable wheels of duty, carrying that earth-shattering secret to Kensington Palace. In the private study, filled with natural yet cold light, Princess Catherine stood motionless by the windowsill, her gaze drifting blankly across the palace courtyard. Prince Edward had just left, leaving on the desk the slender leather box and a copy of the secret letter. His somber, weighty words still echoed in her ears, thickening the air around Catherine and making it difficult to breathe. Rather than a sense of pride or joy at being chosen, a deep unease and heaviness immediately took hold of her mind. Catherine slowly walked toward the desk, her hands clasped so tightly that her fingertips turned pale. She stared fixedly at the leather box that concealed the diamond treasure left behind by the late queen for someone who had spent more than a decade learning to survive and adapt to the harsh rules of the Windsor family. Catherine understood better than anyone that every privilege in this world came at a very steep price. That crown was not simply a dazzling piece of jewelry to enhance her beauty, but a golden shackle of supreme duty, a crushing weight pressing down on shoulders already bearing far too many public expectations. Her anxiety grew even stronger as she turned through the personal notes accompanying the secret letter. The late queen's elegant handwriting not only recorded her name, but also contained remarkably detailed observations about her qualities. The deceased monarch had quietly observed Catherine for many years, from her first days entering the royal family to the various major and minor media crises. The late queen expressed absolute faith in her unconditional service, her calm under pressure, and her tireless dedication, virtues she regarded as the soul that would help the monarchy endure. That highest praise, ironically, became an invisible pressure suffocating Catherine's mind. She wondered if she was truly strong enough to live up to such enormous trust, especially since accepting this would mean throwing herself into the heart of an internal battle with Queen Camilla. Catherine's eyes lingered on the final lines, her lips pressed tightly together, revealing a fierce inner struggle between the desire to preserve family harmony and the responsibility she could not escape before history. As dusk descended, bathing the ancient brick walls of Kensington Palace, in red, Catherine remained seated. Silently at her desk, her fingers gently touched the rough surface of the old envelope, feeling the chill from the past seep into her skin. Awareness of her role and the mission ahead began to take clear shape in the mind of the Princess of Wales. There was no turning back. She knew she had to prepare herself to step into a new chapter of her life, one full of storms, yet also filled with pride. Inside the thick carpeted corridors of Clarence House, a war without gunfire, but filled with intense pressure, was unfolding. Queen Camilla was not one to easily accept dictates from the past. With the pride of someone who had weathered countless storms to claim her current position, she began aggressively seeking ways to reverse the situation. Camilla summoned top legal experts and personal advisors, demanding a rigorous review of the letter's legality and the ownership of the crown. Her eyes followed every movement of the lawyers as they cross-referenced royal legal documents, her hand occasionally gripping the edge of the wooden table, revealing her growing impatience and surging disappointment. With each sympathetic shake of their heads, all of Camilla's efforts slammed into a cold stone wall. The royal antiquities experts and senior legal advisors, after hours of meticulous examination of the signature wax seal and accompanying archived documents, unanimously confirmed the absolute legality of the will. The late Queen's letter held indisputable legal validity. Upon receiving the results, Camilla turned to King Charles, hoping for intervention from the highest authority of her husband. However, facing his wounded wife, the king could only express a profound sense of helplessness. Through his weary eyes and quiet sighs, he was trapped between personal affection and his duty to respect his late mother's legacy, causing all hopes of salvaging Camilla's position to collapse completely. It was precisely when the internal conflict had reached a deadlock that an uncontrollable turning point occurred. Information about the secret letter and the diamond crown suddenly leaked to the outside world. Within just a few hours, sensational headlines filled with speculation began appearing across online news sites and social media. The attention of the entire media and public immediately converged on the palace, triggering an explosive wave of public opinion. Reporters and camera lenses began swarming the entrances and exits of Kensington Palace, lying in wait to capture any expression from the Princess of Wales. At her residence, Catherine clearly felt the pressure from public opinion mounting by the minute. Standing behind a half-drawn curtain, she looked out toward the palace gates, where crowds of journalists were stationed. This leak had pushed her into an irreversible position. Now, every action, every outfit, and especially her upcoming appearances, would be dissected under the public microscope. Catherine's chest rose and fell under the suffocating pressure. But instead of panic, her eyes gradually regained the cold composure of someone who understood that this silent war had officially stepped into the light. The small ceremonial room, tucked deep within the private grounds of Windsor Castle, was enveloped by walls adorned with oil paintings of past monarchs, creating a space completely isolated from the noisy world outside. Here, in accordance with the strict instructions in the late Queen's will, a special meeting took place under absolute secrecy. Prince Edward, acting as the executive of the will, carefully lifted the slender leather box with both hands and slowly approached Princess Catherine. There were no resounding trumpet fanfares, no camera flashes from the media. The ceremony unfolded in an atmosphere of solemnity so intense it was almost suffocating, broken only by the soft rustle of silk and the steady breathing of the few witnesses present. When the lid of the box was open, the diamond crown sparkled under the light of the beeswax candles, radiating a power that was both magnificent and profound. Catherine stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly as they touched the icy metal frame of the treasure. The moment her fingers gently gripped the crown, a sacred feeling mixed with overwhelming pressure filled her mind. This was the instant she officially accepted not only an invaluable piece of jewelry, but also the highest entrustment from the past, a tangible affirmation that she was the chosen one to bear the future of the monarchy. Catherine closed her eyes for a long breath, trying to suppress the emotion rising in her throat, before nodding to signal that she was ready to face it all. Meanwhile, the world outside the palace was engulfed in an unprecedentedly fierce debate. The earlier leak had turned the story of the crown into the focal point of discussion, from renowned historians to the general public. Online forums and television programs, royal observers continuously dissected the meaning of this decision. Many seasoned commentators, with thoughtful frowns on their foreheads, expressed concern that this action would set a dangerous precedent, fracturing the current power structure and openly diminishing Queen Camilla's role. They viewed it as an underlying crisis of legitimacy and spiritual succession within the House of Windsor. However, in contrast to the politically charged concerns of the upper echelons, the public's reaction took on a completely different tone on the streets leading to London, and across social media platforms, a powerful wave of support for Catherine erupted like an unstoppable fire. The people saw in her the image of steadfastness, dedication, and the impeccable grace once embodied by the beloved late Queen. For a society seeking stability amid the turbulence of a new era, Catherine was no longer just the Princess of Wales. She had become a living symbol of the monarchy's future, a beacon of continuity and hope. The invisible crowd's consensus had created a solid foundation of public support, elevating her position to new heights before she faced her greatest trial. That trial was the grand diplomatic banquet held at Buckingham Palace on a weekend evening. It was an event attended by heads of state and ambassadors from around the world, where every diplomatic protocol and attire would be scrutinized under the intense gaze of international media. Inside the preparation room, Catherine stood before a full-length mirror, breathing slowly and deeply as the ladies in waiting carefully secured the legendary diamond crown upon her elegant updo. The diamonds caught the room's light, casting brilliant rays around her refined yet resolute face. She adjusted the long evening gown, her fingers tightening around her small clutch, steadying herself before stepping out of the safe confines of the room. The moment Catherine appeared at the top of the grand staircase, the entire hall seemed to freeze for a second. Hundreds of eyes, from statesmen to courtiers, turned upward, at once fixed upon the sparkling crown on her head. This was no longer mere rumor or a leaked document. Her public appearance was the official confirmation, a powerful declaration to the entire world that Princess Catherine was the sole spiritual heir chosen by the previous head of the monarchy. Each step she took down the marble staircase was remarkably steady and graceful, her head held high, her eyes radiating absolute confidence and composure. Though she knew this action would permanently close the door to reconciliation with certain family members, Catherine did not hesitate. The continuous clicking of hundreds of camera